Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephanie Bishke, and I am an event specialist at the Rutgers University Alumni Association. On behalf of the RUAA, I thank you all for being with us today. Today, I'm pleased to welcome you to Idealistic, Pragmatic, Bold, Women Leaders Transform Higher Education, moderated by Rebecca Mark. Rebecca Mark is the director of the Institute for Women's Leadership and a professor in the Department of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Rutgers University. Professor Mark is a scholar and professor whose research addresses Southern writing and cultural representations of trauma. We are very lucky to have her here with us today. If you have any questions for our panelists, please submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to accommodate as many questions as possible. For your convenience, this presentation is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Rutgers University Alumni YouTube channel. Following this presentation, you will receive an email with a link to the channel. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Rebecca Mark.
Thank you, Stephanie, and the Rutgers University Alumni Association team for making this event possible. On behalf of the Institute for Women's Leadership Consortium, I am pleased to welcome you to this special opportunity to shine a light on women's leadership in higher education. For those of you who may not know about us, the Institute for Women's Leadership, IWL, is a consortium of 10 independent units at Rutgers, New Brunswick, dedicated to the study of women and gender, to advocacy on behalf of gender equity, and to the promotion of women's leadership locally, nationally, and globally. The Juncture in Women's Leadership book series is a long-standing IWL collaboration to increase awareness of women's leadership in business, social movements, the arts, and now the fourth volume, higher education. We are grateful to Rutgers University Press for their support in publishing this 8-volume series. And I must take this moment to highlight our own contributors and esteemed colleagues, Karen Stubas, Vice President and Academic Affairs of Academic Affairs and Administration at Rutgers, New Brunswick, Jacqueline Litt, Dean of Douglas College, and Nancy Cantor, Chancellor of Rutgers University, Newark. I am thrilled to introduce the editors of Junctures in Women's Leadership Higher Education. Carmen Amber is the 15th president of Oberlin College and the first African-American leader in the institution's 185-year history. Amber came to Oberlin in 2017 after serving for 9 years as president of Cedar Crest College. At Oberlin, President Amber initiated a major academic and administrative review process, resulting in recommendations for a new vision for Oberlin. She has established the Presidential Initiative on Racial Equity and Diversity, launching a commission to help guide issues of violence, police-community relationships, and racial injustices. Amber's successes as president of Cedar Crest College included strengthening the college's financial position and increasing student body diversity. Prior to Cedar Crest, Amber served as vice president and dean of Douglas College at Rutgers University and assistant dean of graduate education at the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. As an attorney, she worked in the New York City Law Department as an assistant corporation counsel. Carol Christ is the 11th chancellor and former executive vice chancellor and provost of the University of California, Berkeley. She previously served as president of Smith College from 2002 to 2013, and before that was a professor of English and an administrator at Berkeley for more than 3 decades. Chancellor Christ is an advocate for quality, accessible public higher education, a proponent of the value of a broad education in the liberal arts and sciences, and a champion of women's issues and diversity on college campuses. Since her return to Berkeley, she has worked to foster community and improve the campus climate, strengthen Berkeley's financial position, address the campus housing shortage, and celebrate the institution's longstanding commitment to free speech. Chris received her BA from Douglas College and her MPH and PhD from Yale University. Michele Ozumba is principal and founder of Michele Ozumba and Associates, a consulting firm which helps organizations develop effective programs to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. She is the former president of the Women's College Coalition and past CEO of Women's Funding Network, a global philanthropic organization representing 166 women-led foundations. She has over 25 years of international experience and expertise in executive leadership, academic teaching and research, women-led philanthropy, and innovative program development. Prior to her leadership positions at Women's College Coalition and Women's Funding Network, she was the CEO and president of the Georgia Campaign for Adolescent Power and Potential. In recognition of her nonprofit leadership, Michele was named with Oprah Winfrey to the Fast Company 2012 League of Extraordinary Women. Ozumba graduated from Douglas College with bachelor's degree in history and political science and earned a master's degree in city and regional planning from Rutgers University. Each of you has occupied the highest positions in higher education. You are remarkable leaders. You answer to the titles chancellor, president, CEO. You have each had an opportunity in the Juncture in Women's Leadership Series volume on higher education to explore the professional lives of true women pioneers in higher education. Carmen, you wrote a chapter on Ruth Simmons, former president of both Smith College and Brown University. Michele, you have provided a case study of Molly Corbett Broad, president of the University of North Carolina. And Carol Christ, you composed a study of Hannah Holborn Gray, president of the University of Chicago. So I'm going to ask you if you would each take just a few minutes to let us know what you learned from these extraordinary women presidents and how your knowledge of their life's work has influenced your leadership. And why don't we start with President Ambar?
Wow. Well, first of all, I just want to say that I am so excited to sort of be back at Rutgers in the way that we're doing it. I haven't been for a while, and I'm excited to be here and to be with my panelists, colleagues. You know, this was a great opportunity to look at women from a variety of perspectives, but with a gendered lens around leadership. And I think that that was the sort of important part of it for me, to look at leadership from a gendered lens. And I will say that the goal of this book wasn't for us to try to establish some biological difference between men and women in leadership, but it was really to look at the sort of values that these women brought to the table. And I also think to look at them in the context of rising from challenging odds, right? So we were looking at the challenge that they were experiencing at the time and trying to figure out how they played those values in a way that created success, or at least created opportunity. So that was really the piece for me. I think Ruth is extraordinary in every way. I think many people have looked up to Ruth as a leader to aspire to be like. But I think particularly for African-American, both men and women in higher education, I think Ruth has been a standard bearer that we all look to. And now she's at Prairie View A&M. Some of you may have seen that she just got an incredible gift there for that institution and kind of was brought out of retirement to sort of lead this historically Black college in sort of her hometown. And I got a chance to go interview her. And I would say that my only regret really, because the press school wouldn't really allow this, is that I really just wanted to put the interview in there with nothing else, because that would have been enough, honestly. With no analysis, just put the transcript in. because I was literally had the opportunity to sit at the feet of a master leader. And even in the moment that I was doing it, I was learning from her. I was in my first year here at Oberlin as I was learning from her. So I thought what I would do in my few minutes is to give you some quotes from that transcript that I could not put in the book, but that I think are the three big keys that I took away from her. One is about bringing all of who you are to your leadership role, the sort of authenticity piece that we talk about. One is about boldness, and one is about what it means to start out in a controversial way, and initiatives that you start out in a controversial way. So I hope, I'll do my couple of minutes here just in this way. So she said, I argue often that so many young people who want to be leaders imagine a construct of leadership, and they come and ask me for the checklist of what it means to be a good leader. And I often say that hasn't been my experience at all. And I go back to my background and my childhood and the ways that I was formed as a human being. And I say that to encourage people to understand that the best leaders are simply the people that they are. They bring everything they've experienced. And if they've grown up in a certain way and they're passionate about something, or if they've had tragic circumstances, or whatever has made them who they are, that's the leader that they have to be, not some cardboard cutout of a leader. And for that reason, because I grew up in the South and in segregation, I'll always try to do just that, be nothing more or anything less than who I am. And that has helped me immensely. And I really sort of took that in as I was talking to her. And she talked a lot about not being an imitation of something that you've seen before. That what people are really looking for is deep authenticity. And that uniqueness in yourself is exactly what they're looking for. So don't change that, she said. And she said she couldn't understand why in this day and age, people are still hiding parts of themselves. She can't find a rational reason for that, because honestly, what people want for me. And I took that to heart as I was starting my time at Oberlin, right? That I was there because of exactly who I am, and that's exactly who I should be. The second thing I learned from her was about boldness. And I asked her about, her views of this decision to form this commission. Did she think it was bold? It's certainly, remember, she formed this commission on racial justice 15 years ago, right? So think about how that's in vogue today. So she's doing that 15 years ago. And she said, it's not bold. It just felt like the right decision. I think that in universities, we're constantly wrestling with just trying to make the right decision day after day. And sometimes they have weight and sometimes they don't. But it's very much the way I try to live my life. And so sometimes I think we're in pursuit of boldness and pursuit of transformation. And what Ruth was in pursuit of make the right decision and make it on a day-to-day basis. And then the last thing I'll leave you with, and this was the thing that was maybe most helpful to me. I was in the midst of starting this academic program review. When you come in as a president, sometimes you have to do some controversial things. That was true for me when I got here to Oberlin. So I really needed to hear this last thing I'll say to you, because we have to do controversial things sometimes in these leadership roles. And this is what she said to me. And I asked her, well, how aware were you of all the challenge of it and the controversy? And she said, let's just say I was aware of it. And I'd also say that I'm a pragmatist, in the sense that I'm never surprised by the diversity of reactions of people that they can have on any particular topic or phenomenon. I'm rarely surprised by that. And over the years, I've come accustomed to understanding that you can't be bothered by all those reactions. But if I had to tell you something, if I was younger, I probably would have handled this differently. I would have been less seasoned, less patient, less understanding of the fact that you don't know the outcome until you know the outcome. And just because things start in a difficult way doesn't mean they're going to end in a difficult way. And there were many decisions that I had to undertake that were controversial, but in the end, people held them as brilliant. And so I've learned over time not to take it for granted, that just because people are howling at the outset doesn't mean that that will be their reaction in the end. So I wish I could give you the transcript, because that's what I learned from Ruth Simmons. And I think she is the sort of consummate leader to aspire to, because she brings who she is to the table. She's not afraid of being who she is, and she lets that speak for itself.
Thank you so much, President Ambar, and whoever would like to go next. Carol?
Sure. Well, I wrote a chapter on Hannah Gray. I knew of Hannah Gray as the former president of the University of Chicago far before I had actually met her. She was, for me, a kind of legendary figure in higher education. At that point, the first woman who had led a major research university. But we actually met through our common love of chamber music, and met also my late husband was a classmate of hers at Harvard when they were both in graduate school. So we met in a personal context that really didn't have anything to do with either my or her leadership role in higher education. Hannah Gray is an interesting figure for this book because Hannah's always resisted being thought of as a woman president or a woman leader in higher education. She, in fact, when she was introduced as the president of the University of Chicago, she was introduced by the chair of the board of trustees, and he introduced her as the very first president of the University of Chicago who was born abroad. But she's been an advocate on lots of women's issues through her career, even though she finds that a limiting definition. I learned so much about how you approach leading an institution through Hannah. And I'll take you through the various steps that she took me through in our conversation. What we chose to focus on when she became president of the University of Chicago, graduate education was in crisis nationally. And it was particularly in crisis in the University of Chicago. And so she chose that as one of the important issues that she would focus on. And I mean, that taught me that you have to, as a leader, choose your issue that is both strategic for the institution and important for the institution, and one where progress in relationship to it is going to be transformational for the institution. She also taught me that you really need to place the issue in a national context, that we're all, I think, subject to the kind of like Wobegon syndrome for the institutions that we lead, thinking there's no place like it, it's absolutely unique. That's actually not true. There's a huge similarity, kind of kinship between certainly similar kinds of institutions. So she was careful to place that issue in a national context of the conversation about graduate education. So first you have to ask the right question, and then you have to put it in a context that's a national context, a more universal context than your own institution. Then for any big question, you need to establish and be very clear about what the process is. We all know at colleges and universities, there are literally thousands of stakeholders in our institutions, all of whom feel that they should have a determinative voice. Probably this is more true of the faculty than any other group. So establishing a clear process in which you can hear those institutional voices. Hannah is a kind of genius at understanding governmental processes. The University of Chicago had a rather Byzantine faculty governance system, which Hannah used expertly to her advantage as she both led and coaxed the institution toward the goals that she wanted it to achieve. And then finally, one of the things she taught me is communicate, communicate, communicate. Just, you can't say it too many times. Use every means that's available to you so that people always know what question you're asking, where you're going, what point you are in the process, where the conversation is. She's an amazing person. She just celebrated her 90th birthday with a wonderful symposium in her honor.
That is a wonderful summing up of her work. She's done such extraordinary work. I am going to turn it over to Michele right now, and then we will move on to the next question.
Thank you. And I also want to thank the Rutgers Alum Association for organizing this webinar, and I look forward to conversations with my fellow panelists. I had the privilege of spending a day with Molly Broad and in her home in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. She had retired from her term as a president of ACE, the association, American Association. So she, there was a few things that came out of that I took away from her in terms of her tenure as leadership and lessons learned as well. And the first thing that struck me was Molly Broad is so humble. Her humility is in front of everything. And when we got into the conversation, I kept trying to push for her to tell me about her accomplishments, and she very seldom used the word I. It was always we, and she was quick to acknowledge those who had supported her journey along the way. She also had the privilege of some early executive experiences before she got to UNC in roles of major universities, public universities. Well, she was not all public, but she was at Syracuse, where she was became VP of Government and Corporate Relations, and that had her going up to the capital of New York several times to really learn the ropes of what it means to engage with elected officials who have an influence on budgets and so on. And then at the University of Arizona, she became the chief executive officer of that university that had, I believe, 3 campuses across the state. And then she was at California State University and became vice chancellor. So she had these really extensive and deep experiences, what it takes to manage these complex systems of universities that she brought with her to UNC. The other thing, she came to UNC, she took up the helm in 1997, and she was there from 1997 to 2007, I believe. And she, it was a time when the state was itself going through a tremendous economic growth, and really their economy was transitioning from agriculture to biomedical research. And of course, the UNC and their research triangle was central to that growth. And so as an economist, Molly really understood the role of the institution as a resource engine for the state's economy. It wasn't just an ivory tower of a beautiful campus. And it also had 16 campuses across this huge state, from in urban centers and in rural counties. In Southeast North Carolina, there's a campus where it's majority Native American students enrolled. She had some HBCUs as part of the 16 campus constellation. And what she did was, after learning all of these campuses and looking at the status, she was able to really portray to the state the inequities in investment across those 16 campuses. So dilapidated facilities, unequipped labs. One campus had to put a halt on admissions because they couldn't accommodate new enrollment. And there was unprecedented projected growth in student enrollment at that time because of the growth of the state and the economy, and what was attracting people to North Carolina. So her major initiative was the Focused Growth Initiative. And again, using her economic experience, as well as her experience gained while working with government, she was able to build an amazing coalition of amongst state stakeholders. And what she did was come up with a shared aspiration. So she took this campaign to barbershops, to hair salons, as well as to even to DC, where Jesse Helms convened all the state legislators to lunch to say he was going to support Molly's initiative. The other thing she did was really think about her strategy with how to get to yes. And her original request was for $6 billion, which was going to be the largest state bond in higher ed history in the country. So she reduced the request to $3 billion. And she was able to really also apply a media strategy where public TV in North Carolina filmed these facilities and was able to show what was needed. And so you had a situation where in her first 3 years, just in her third year of presidency, she got the state bond measure approved for $3 billion, $2.5 billion for UNC, and 6 million for community colleges. And I think her strategy of going to barbershops and hair salons to get local support, to get everyday people support who, no matter your social class, you had a value for education. And then working with the elected officials. And for the first, probably the first and last time in North Carolina, you had Jesse Helms and the African-American state elected officials on the same side of an issue that is really trying to reduce the equities in infrastructure across 16 campuses and support community colleges as well. So what I took away from that in terms of her leadership practice was what I would call invitational and inclusive leadership. That is, she didn't come up with a strategy that was going to sort of create a hierarchy of campuses. I mean, it already kind of has one just by the nature of Chapel Hill versus everyone else, but the public expression and the support across a wide diversity of stakeholders really was able to kind of form a unified purpose around this amazing request for $3 billion. And so that, I think, speaks to a combination of not just her humility, but her quiet brilliance and acknowledging and inviting people into the process, where they share ownership of the vision as well as the execution of it. While you have major political differences between what Jesse Helms stood for and what some of the state officials stood for, they came around this one purpose: to improve the infrastructure, both the physical plant and as well as the kinds of improvements that would allow the university to attract high quality faculty as well. And so I think thinking strategically, much like what we heard from Carmen and Carol in their profiles, this ability to really think strategically, to be authentic in your leadership. I think, I'm reminded of James Baldwin. James Baldwin said, history is never in the past. We carry our histories with us. And so it doesn't mean that we're stuck in our history, but just like Ruth Simmons said, you bring your history with you. And for Molly Broad, her mother was one of 18 children and the only one to go to college. And both her parents were school teachers. And she came from not a wealthy family, and she had one cousin who had gone to Syracuse. So that's the school she knew she would go to. And the father said, well, we can't afford it, but she got a scholarship and got to go. The other thing was, as an undergraduate at Syracuse, a professor reached out to her and encouraged her to major in economics, because she wasn't thinking of economics, but he saw potential in her. And that also reminded me of how important it is for especially students of color to really have someone who acknowledges and takes them under the wing and shows them the ropes and creates opportunity. And that sort of followed her throughout her career. So that's Molly, and in a nutshell. There's so many other pieces to her, but I think the takeaway was her humility, her inclusive leadership, and her ability to create a unified purpose to execute successfully that major initiative to transform the university.
Thank you so much, Michele. And we're very careful, as President Amber said, not to say, well, if you're a woman, you're going to lead in a certain way. But I can say, after reading each of these case studies, that there's a certain amount of work, just willingness to work and to talk to whoever you need to talk to. The inclusivity is really striking. And the fact that I don't think any of these women actually ever retire. So that they keep working. And the vision, I would say also the vision is more important than the individual. That what they are trying to accomplish is more important than their ego. And that is quite striking and something we can take away. I'm going to ask you a second question here. So this has been a year unlike any other year. Let's just put it that way, in so many ways. And in the positions you're in, you know what that's meant. President Hannah Holborn Gray asked the most fundamental question: what should the university aspire to be? We would like to ask each of you, from your perspective, what should the university of 2021 aspire to be?
I can begin. That one of the things I'm sure we've all been struck by about the pandemic is that it's been an inequity amplifier. And we can see that so vividly with our students. Berkeley has been remote for the whole year, and it's such a huge difference, having a reliable Wi-Fi connection, having a quiet place to study. There are so many ways in which even some of the rough equities that all being on campus together creates among students have been erased by the pandemic. So I think a lot about equity of experience for our students, and I think we have to be even more committed to equity of experience as an aspiration for our institutions.
I would certainly agree with that. I guess, for me, one of the parts of this pandemic that has been so challenging is all the ways that it's played out on our campuses, whether it's the inequity issues, whether it's the issues of race that have come up, whether it's issues of how the campus manages through a public health crisis. And I said early on to our graduates that what I hope we're doing for them is that they are ready to meet the world as it is, but also to change it, right? That we prepare them in that way to meet the world as it is, but to also change it. And so what I hope we're doing is, from a curricular perspective, we're giving them sort of knowledge and expertise to be able to meet that world as it is, but we're also providing them with the types of skills that they need to change it, to take complexity and break it down into its component parts and make it better. I think the other thing that I think has occurred for us over this year is the role we play as an institution in fostering innovation and creativity. So that it breeds itself, right? But it has to have an incubator to develop. And so part of what I think we're trying to do for our students is to provide that incubator for creativity and innovation. It was born out by necessity for all of us this year. And yet I know for our students, it's going to be a requirement for their work in the broader world. And I guess the other piece would be, as Carol said, this reflective work that we've all had to do around diversity, equity, and inclusion this year has been, I've been calling it a palate cleanser. It's allowed us to have the freedom, even though there's been challenge in it, to not be constrained by our history or bound by our prior initiatives, and to sort of cleanse the palate a bit and look at ourselves anew, and to be willing to assess what we've done well, but to also challenge those areas where we haven't quite lived up to our own expectations. And so I hope that palate cleanser will be one that impacts all of higher education. And that is another piece that we have to send our students in the world better prepared for.
I'm just going to follow up a moment here and ask if you have a story from a student, because there is no higher education without the students that we're educating. Do you have a story, Carol or Carmen, about a student who met this year in an exceptional way where you were so moved or inspired by what they did? And then Michele, you're not in the classroom right now, but we'll get to that in your work as well.
I don't know if I would say about a particular student, but I will say that I have been, there've been a lot of critique of students and how they engaged on the campus this year in all sorts of ways. But on the whole, I think what's happened is that our students have demonstrated a commitment to a community of care that I don't think people give 18, 19, and 20 and 21-year-olds much credit for. And their desire for us, so we've been on campus all year, our students, we've been fully on campus. And our students were so diligent in their mask wearing and adherence to our policies that the city council said to us that they changed the behavior of people in the town because of how they engaged. And it was a way for the town, these town gown issues can be complicated in these small towns. But it showed the town who our students truly are. It wasn't just caring about themselves, they cared about the town and other people. And so, and that happened on a lot of college campuses all over the country. And so our students showed up to demonstrate who they are in ways that I think we don't oftentimes give credit to this generation of students, and particularly the students at this age.
I'd like to highlight the work of some of our graduate students in molecular and cell biology. You remember in the early days of the pandemic, there was a shortage of hand sanitizer and a kind of hysteria about not having enough of it. They figured out how to adapt their laboratory to mix up big vats of hand sanitizer, which they then distributed to homeless shelters, jails, places that would have trouble getting it. And I just have seen that kind of generosity and public service orientation in so many of our students this year.
That's both wonderful stories. And Michele, I'll get back to the question I asked before about this year being like no other. In your work, what has that meant?
Well, I think, and first of all, I love the examples that Carol and Carmen shared, because it speaks to what I think is my answer to part of the answer to the question. That is that universities becoming relevant solution builders, that they really are places, because the younger generation, like Carmen says, really they're keenly interested in the global perspective on issues that are going to define their futures. And if you look at the global response to George Floyd's tragedy, I mean, it was phenomenal to see people protesting in every continent and around the world because of this injustice. And it was young people primarily all across the globe and in our country too. So they've gone through so much, not just this past year, but if you think about just all the things that are swirling around them, from the climate change to the crises, to student debt, to the mental health challenges. It's called, the institutions really, we don't have the luxury anymore of being ivory towers that create this haven. We really have to be relevant to what's happening in the community. And at the same time, becoming community facing, but also maintaining academic rigor, because that's really at the core of what the institutions are about. And to that extent, I also feel what would be helpful for this transition of the culture of higher ed institutions is to really be stronger in advocating why liberal arts, sciences beyond STEM are so important to sustaining a healthy democracy. And I think the institution, the academic sector, higher ed sector, has an important role to play in that. And maybe because there's so many things happening that, as Carmen said, clear the palette to really process and reflect and kind of recalibrate what really defines the academic, the higher ed sector in a way that's very relevant to these broader issues in society. I think that's the opportunity as well as the challenge for this coming year and beyond, quite honestly.
I think that's a very important aspect of the work we do at universities, is to engage what creates a healthy democracy. And I know that Chancellor Christ and President Amber, you have been addressing those issues very clearly. And we have watched as the possibility of, democracy being under attack. And also watched our young people fill the streets and say no. And so that's been a very exciting part of this year. I'm going to ask a question, and it comes partly from my having just watched our Mother's Gardens, which, if anybody gets a chance to watch that documentary, it's quite profound. And as we are leaders, Carmen, you talked about bringing your whole self to the job, that Ruth believed you brought your whole self. And each of you have brought your whole self to this job, your whole history. Is there something, a passion, a skill, advice, words that go through your head that come from your mother, your aunt, your grandmother, somebody who raised you who wasn't a biological relative, somebody that you always think about when you're at work. These are very hard jobs. These, as we saw in the writings that you did, these are jobs where people are challenged, where the struggle between tradition and change is always difficult. Who is it that echoes in your brain and helps you through the days?
Well, I can start that one. It's so interesting, this question, because I remember at the most challenging times, running a nonprofit, what's your challenge? Meeting payroll every month. The unevenness of cash flow, trying to really retain great staff and keep them, keep the morale up and satisfy, just like you all have to satisfy so many constituencies. So does a nonprofit leader, your donors, your beneficiaries, and everyone, and your boards. And I always found myself instinctively in those moments thinking of who raised me. I didn't think about my credentials, my title, my role. I always went back to, my mother, my grandmothers, and my aunts, who were all hardworking women. They weren't, quote, professional women, but they all worked very hard to raise their families along with our fathers. But my grandmother on my mother's side was widowed when my mother was just 6 years old, and she raised 5 children, and she stayed a widow until she passed in her 90s. And she was a seamstress. And my mother worked for 30 years, 11 to 7 at night on the hospital, raising 10 children. She and my father, we had 5 boys, 5 girls. So my image is hard work and the integrity and just what Carmen said earlier, your whole self, you kind of fall on who you are. It's really not your credentials and your title. And I find that that's what gave me strength to get through some of these challenges across my career. Even up till today, that's what I do. I remember my Sunday school teacher, really teach, because she was a teacher, not just Sunday school, but she was really an educated woman who gave us so many life lessons. And that's what I call on for these moments, these junctures.
Mm.
I was very inspired by my grandmother. She was an immigrant from the Ukraine. She never went past the 3rd grade. She was tremendously wise, very hardworking. She both had a full-time job, a night job. She was a janitress on Wall Street, in a Wall Street bank. She used to call it her Wall Street job, as well as raised her 3 children. And there's an incident that I remember so vividly still from when I was in graduate school. I had just a relationship with a man had just ended. I was very upset by it. And we're all at the dinner table. I guess I was home for a visit. And my mother was criticizing me for not, having a relationship that lasted and, you'll never get married. And I got very upset and I ran from the table. My grandmother followed after me and she said, "Carol, don't worry about a husband, worry about a job."
Good advice there.
If anyone's ever heard me speak before, I always get up and talk about my parents because of how incredible they are. Grew up in the segregated South. My dad was picking cotton when he was 6 years old and grew up picking cotton all his life. And my mom, this Black girl who grew up in Searcy, Arkansas, who somehow got her mind wrapped around getting a PhD in dance, which should never have been. I always describe it as divine intervention because there's no way that you see that or know that, right? And she went back and got her PhD when she was married and had 3 children. And she left and went away for that time to go and do that. And I always say that it was incredible of my dad to sort of support that in an era where that was not something you should do. He was there taking care of the 3 children while she was 6 hours away getting her PhD. And my mom taught me, and my dad taught me that a life with a mind and family life could exist in the same human being by supporting her. And my mom taught me that, that pursuit was an important part of her whole self, right? So I would say that the big 3-year couple of lessons there, my mom is quick to say, and my dad too, that they only bring the best people to deal with difficult issues. And so I've always, as crazy as it sounds, when something's difficult or challenging, I kind of feel like I'm at an advantage because I'm like, yeah, that's what they bring people like me here to do, right? That's just, when it's something difficult and challenging, I feel prepared for it because they bring the best people to do that, Carmen. The other thing is that my parents are huge believers in laughter and humor. I'm always saying to the senior leadership team at some point, well, I'll tell you what my mom would say. I'll tell you what my grandmother would say about this, because these jobs are relentless. They're like triplets. They're relentless. Some of you know I have triplets. And so you have to have some humor to work through them. And I guess the third thing for me is really my faith walk. My parents are people of faith. And, I just posted on this blog that I do sometimes, this Post-it note that said, things are running right on schedule and according to plan, sign the universe. And so I am a realistic optimist. I believe that whatever it is, it's going to work out for good. And I operate as if that is how it's going to be. And so no matter what the challenge, I try to bring that sense of faith and belief that it's going to work out for good. My mom and dad brought that to the table. I can't imagine doing these jobs without that sense of optimism and possibility thinking, because they would be crushing if I didn't think that there was a way through and a way out. And that all it requires is creativity, the right people, and some hard work.
Though I would like to say, we've talked a lot about these jobs. You bring your whole self to this job, and that's certainly true. But one of the things that I've learned is it's also important to create places in yourself that you can separate from the job, because otherwise you just will burn yourself out and go crazy.
Yeah, no, never words were spoken.
I like to call that giving yourself to yourself, because you spend your time giving so much to do this challenging work. That I agree, Carol. It's just, you got to give yourself to yourself, and not feel guilty about it. It's part of it. Yeah,
we're a long way away from thinking of ourselves as super women. And all the young people who are listening today, we do have places that we take care of ourselves. That's how women leaders make it through, and humor and all of that is extremely important. I remember learning to cook because my mother was getting her PhD, and cooking is now a way that I enjoy my afternoons. And I can tell President Amber that my son learned to cook at Oberlin. So thank you. Cooked for the houses, and he cooked for 60 people.
Oh, so he was an Oscar. Okay, good.
Very good. I would like to open the questioning to the audience, and I am not seeing questions in the Q&A, so please ask these brilliant women your questions, and you couldn't have better models for leadership. So I am going to be following the Q&A, and hopefully there's going to be a few questions, or I will start asking more questions, which I always have. I will ask this question while we're waiting, since I don't see any questions right now. If you were talking to a young woman who is moving into a leadership position, so she may be 30 or so, and she has this sense that she has to be perfect at what she's doing, what would you say to her? And you can answer these. There are some questions coming in, but
nobody's perfect. And if you can't learn to both recognize your mistakes and learn constructively from them, you're not going to be a very good leader. I mean, we all make mistakes, and the question is not, will you make a mistake? The question is, what can you take from your mistake that makes you better at whatever it is the next time?
That's right.
Yeah. And one of the things about the Junctures book is that all the case studies were not all about success.
No.
that the people acknowledged some of the things that they wanted to do and didn't get to do, or was met with backlash. So again, it's not about being perfect. It's really putting yourself out there to do what you believe is the right thing to do, and learn. You never stop learning. Mistakes are an opportunity to learn.
All right, we have 3 questions coming up. The first is, how do you handle imposter syndrome? I'm going to give all 3 right now, and you can answer whichever one you want. How do you
Okay.
balance your family and career aspirations? And how has your definition of leadership changed over the course of your time?
You know, imposter syndrome is a term of art that I didn't have when I was entering into these leadership roles, and so I don't know if I can to describe it in exactly the way this generation of students thinks about not feeling quite qualified, not feeling like you deserve to be there, wondering whether you are capable or the right person for the role. But essentially, that's sort of the framing of it. I think that, for me, I grew up in an era where it was that you succeed in despite what the challenge is, and that a belief in yourself was a part of knowing that that was possible. One of the reasons why I like to read biographies is because when you're reading that biography, you know that the person in that moment doesn't know it's going to turn out great. And so you get a chance to see fully what it means to know that it turns out fine, and you're reading it in the midst of it. And so one of the ways to think about whether you deserve to be there or should be there, or people perceive you are right for the position or not, is to just know that over time, what the highest achieving people have recognized is that their best is good enough. And they've learned over time that if they give their best, they separate themselves from other people. And so I don't worry so much about, whether I deserve to be there or not, or who thinks I should be there or not, because I've learned over time that my best is good enough. And that helps me not worry so much about who thinks I should or shouldn't be there, or whether I'm worthy or not. The truth of the matter is we're all unworthy. And so once you accept that, then you can be fine with it and just do the best you can.
I'm going to ask a different question because there's questions coming in right and left. I'm going to ask if there's one skill you can highlight, and everybody doesn't have to answer every question. There's one skill you can highlight. What is something you know now that you wish you knew when you were starting out in early leadership roles? And that kind of goes with what would your advice be for your younger self? Or what is your one skill that you have now that you wish you'd known about earlier?
Oh, I had to really learn to speak from the heart. It's very much what Carmen was saying about what Ruth Simmons said. I mean, that you're a better leader the more authentic you are. And so that's something I wish I could have told my younger self.
Yeah, for me, real quickly, it's managing expectations, not just expectations of yourself, but expectations of those you're working with and reporting to, or those reporting up to you, because it's when you manage expectations, then you kind of it clears the way for whatever's going to happen. And I didn't know that starting out. You start out thinking like you can do everything. So manage expectations. This
is the hardest question, and it's the last question. So we'll see what we can do with it. Isn't that always the case? With today's fundamental threat to democracy, Alice Herman is asking this: what role should higher education play in strengthening an understanding of what the building blocks are and the importance of actively defending them? Do women educators have a special role to play in defending the threat to democracy?
I actually don't think women educators have a special role to play. I think educators have a special role to play. And there's several ways in which I would say that's the case. First of all, respect for the facts and for science is something that's at the heart of all of our institutions. And secondly, is learning to talk to each other across difference. whether those are differences of identities or differences of opinions. Those are the two critical building blocks of democracy, where universities and colleges are poised to play just foundational roles.
I totally agree. So one of the things I said when I first came to Oberlin, because people have a particular perspective about our political leaders at Oberlin and how we operate as an institution, and I said we can't be a place that celebrates difference, but only the difference we agree with. And, you know, I mean, and that is sort of quintessentially how we started to operate as a country, right? So two things I'll say. One is that I think Carol's right that we have a special role to play in this issue of being able to listen across different political perspectives or identities, not with the goal of changing the other person's mind, but with the goal of understanding. And so we launched a program here at Oberlin called Sustained Dialogue, with the goal of having every student be in this program. They get in a cohort of 16 or so students over 10 or so sessions, where they bring up a topic that's controversial and they practice it. I mean, we gotta practice it. How do you listen to other people that you totally disagree with, but you listen with the purpose of understanding, not with the purpose of trying to change their mind? And we believe that we have a role to play in helping students go out in the world to do that. And the only thing I'll say that's not contradicting Carol, but is to talk about it more broadly. I do think that we have been too hard on this generation of students around this issue. And, you know, as if these 18, 19, and 20 and 21-year-olds should have it right, but Congress, whatever, at the Thanksgiving table, doesn't matter, right? And I'm saying to myself, wait a minute, they are in the developmental stage of their life trying to understand how to do this, and we can't get it right as a nation. And so let's not hold us to a different standard than we're holding the rest of society to, even though we do have a role in helping students go out into the world and be able to understand how they respond to different perspectives.
Just briefly, Rebecca, I'm reminded of listening to Carmen, Professor Eddie Glaude at Princeton said we have to learn how to live differently with our differences. And it's really a call to action for us to really be much more intentional about it and thoughtful, and really try to leverage those things that are going to strengthen the democracy as opposed to ripping us apart. And that's hard work. And I think our institutions have a huge role to play in helping the country navigate toward that goal.
I think that's a wonderful place to land and to end this extraordinary conversation that you three of you have brought us, and that all of the work in Junctures has been leading to. If you have not read the Junctures volume, I have it right here. It's Junctures in Women's Leadership, Higher Education. It's really quite extraordinary, and I would read it as soon as you possibly can. I want to thank each of you, Michele, Carmen, Carol, for a very informative, very deep conversation on difficult topics. I hope all of the women leaders in this book serve as role models for the future for anyone who's leading, and that the kinds of strategies and the willingness to listen and the willingness to work goes forward to the next generation and the next generation. Thank you so very much for being here today. And thank you to everyone in the audience.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.